Welcome to Talking Points. My name is Dr. Stephen E. Gardner, and I'm here sharing with you another segment on our brand new series entitled Core Values for Faith and Community Leaders. In the last couple of weeks, we talked about leadership and influence. And today we're going to talk about begin to talk about a variety of leadership theories that have been out there. Some you may have heard of, and others might be totally brand new. And you might find out from listening to some of these theories why you believe what you believe about leadership and why certain measurement instruments have been implemented by companies, employers, and even the kind that you can delve into from a self-reflection or self-perspective. So today I want to begin to talk about one of those theories that's been out for well over 100 years. You may have heard of it. And it's called the trait approach. The trait approach. So let's delve right into this particular segment. Trait versus process leadership. Obviously, in the last two segments, we kind of emphasized process leadership. And process leadership is a contemporary term as to how leadership is defined in our era. But alongside that, we find that there are other leadership models out there that do inform individuals' perception and insight, and even companies' beliefs about how leadership should be perceived. So we've all heard statements like, they were born to be a leader. These statements are made by those who take a trait perspective towards leadership. The trait perspective suggests that certain individuals have special or innate characteristics or qualities that make them leaders. And it is these qualities that differentiate them from non-leaders. Some of those qualities include unique physical factors, personality features, and other characteristics. The process viewpoint or perspective suggests that leadership is a phenomenon that resides in the context of interactions between leaders and followers and makes leadership available to everyone. As a process, leader can be observed in leader behaviors and can be learned. So let's think about that. If leadership is a process and it can be observed in leader behaviors and can be learned, that brings to mind a certain concept or practice called modeling. And thereby, an individual models before another so that that individual would be able to see exactly what they would do. As we refer to the scriptures and biblical examples, we find that both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Well, in the New Testament, Jesus modeled before his disciples, showed them what they should be doing, and they emulated him in the process. Or we can refer back to the Old Testament, where we find that Elijah and Elisha and that relationship, and how that Elisha followed Elijah wherever he went. And as a result of that, we find that when Elijah was about to be taken up into heaven, Elijah asked the question, Elijah asked Elisha, what is it that you want? And Elisha said, well, I want a double portion of your spirit. And Elijah said, you've asked a hard thing. But he said, if you see me go up, the thing you want, in so many words, will be granted. Well, he saw him go up. But now here he is on the other side of Jordan. And the only thing that he can recall that got him on the other side of the Jordan was that Elijah took the mantle, smote the waters, and the waters parted, and the two of them went across. And so what did Elijah do? He remembered what Elijah did. Elijah modeled before Elisha on what he should do in the situation that was facing him. And that's kind of what process leadership is about. And so, or the modeling aspect of it. So what did Elisha do? He picked up the mantle, smote the waters, and walked back across on the other side on dry land. And as a result, what did the sons of the prophets that were standing there say? That the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha. So in other words, Elisha followed the example of Elijah and was able to learn some things on how to respond. And so that's what process leadership is about, that others can learn how to do the same things that you learn. But when we talk about trait approach, it's been around for well over 100 years. And let me just kind of give you a brief history about the trait approach. Well, it has its roots in leadership theory that suggests that certain people were born with special traits that make them leaders. I think we all have grew up and have heard, statements like that. He or she was born to be a leader. They were born with these signs of leadership in their life. Because it was believed that leaders and non-leaders could be differentiated by a universal set of traits. Throughout the 20th century, researchers were challenged to identify the definitive traits of a leader. And around the mid-20th century, several major studies questioned the basic premise that a unique set of traits define leadership. As a result, attention shifted, incorporating the impact of situations and of followers on leadership. So researchers began to study the interaction between leaders, followers, and their context instead of focusing only on leaders' traits. More recently, there have been signs that trait research has come full circle, with a renewed interest in focusing directly on the critical traits of leaders. So that's a brief history about the trait approach. And maybe you thought that, hey, traits was pretty much a part of what we learned about leadership. And it is true. But the idea was informed by leadership theory. So let's look at this. And what I've had on this chart that I've adapted from A Force for Change, how leadership differs from management. On this chart that I've constructed here, you find on the one side, you see trait definition of leadership. And on the other side, you find the process definition of leadership. And underneath the trait definition of leadership, there were certain things that kind of were looked up to, or certain things that were identified with the leader. Their height, their intelligence, extroversion, fluency, and other traits. However, in process leadership, it didn't even consider any of those 5 things that were listed there. But in process leadership, it's the interaction between the followers and the leaders that defines how leadership should be viewed. Well, trait theory, or the trait approach, has brought to bear 5 major leadership traits. Number 1 is intelligence. And obviously intelligence is intellectual ability that is positively related to leadership. It also, one of the other traits is self-confidence. Leaders involved in influencing others and self-confidence allows the leader to feel assured that his or her attempts to influence others are appropriate and right. So leadership, it involves influencing others. And self-confidence has an important part to play on the behalf of the leader. Well, the next leadership trait is determination. People with determination are willing to exert themselves. They are proactive, and they have the capacity to persevere in the face of obstacles. That's a clear sign of a leadership trait. Again, if we refer to some biblical examples, we can see that when King David was thirsty and he was out there on the field as a warrior, and two of his men, when he broke through the camp of the enemy, brought him some water and brought it back. You see that example of determination, how they had the capacity to persevere in the face of obstacles. These are a clear sign of leadership. Do you have intelligence? Obviously, you want to have someone that's leading you that has some sort of common sense, as we talked about last week. You don't want to have someone that's supposed to be a leader and that's dramatically or drastically falling short in the areas of just basic common sense. It's hard to look up to that person or persons as leaders because why? It's just because they don't display what should be a natural outcome or a natural trait of a leader, especially based upon the leadership theory or the trait approach or the trait theory. Another thing we can look at as a major leadership trait is integrity. Oh my God. We really need to get back to honesty and integrity. And maybe we'll spend some time and talk about character and integrity and how they are intertwined and how that they are some major aspects that pertain or major aspects that are associated with a leader. Integrity makes a leader believable and worthy of our trust. Is the person that's leading you, is a person in front of you, are they believable? Are they dependable? Are they trustworthy? Are they honest? So integrity goes a long way, and whether we ascribe it to a theory or not, it is definitely what you're looking for in the life and lifestyle of a leader. And the other aspect that's considered to be a major leadership trait is sociability. Leaders who show sociability are friendly, outgoing, tactful, and diplomatic. They are friendly, outgoing, tactful, and diplomatic. You just have to have tact today. You got to be diplomatic when it comes to negotiating ideas and negotiating directions of change. You just don't want to be a bull in a china shop just to bulldoze your way and have your own agenda embrace irregardless of the feelings or the opinions or the needs of others. Sociability is that trait, as it were, to where a person's friendly. And they're outgoing, obviously, but they utilize tact and diplomacy when it comes to negotiating their particular viewpoints or their particular stance. Well, one of the other things that has informed leadership is a 5-factor personality model. The 5-factor personality model. And we see some of those factors here. And we see neuroticism is a personality model, which is a tendency to be depressed, anxious, insecure, vulnerable, and hostile. Extroversion, which we've already briefly talked about, is a tendency to be sociable and assertive and have positive energy. Openness, that's a tendency to be informed, creative, insightful, and even curious. Agreeableness is a tendency to be accepting, conforming, trusting, and also nurturing. And lastly is conscientiousness, which is a tendency to be thorough, organized, controlled, dependable, and decisive. When we begin to talk about this 5-factor personality model and how it correlates or intersects with leadership, this is what we've come to understand. Over the past 25 years, a consensus has emerged among researchers regarding the basic factors that make up what we call personality. These factors, commonly called the Big Five, are neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. To assess the links between the Big Five, Judge, Bono, Illes, and Gerhardt in 2002, they conducted a major meta-analysis of 78 leadership and personality studies published between 1967 and 1998. And they discovered a strong relationship with the Big Five traits and leadership. And it appeared that having certain personality traits is associated with being an effective leader. So specifically, this is what they came up with. Extroversion was a factor most strongly associated with leadership. It is the most important trait of an effective leader. And we already defined that extroversion is the tendency to be sociable and assertive and have positive energy. Extroversion was followed in order by conscientiousness, openness, and low neuroticism. The last factor, agreeableness, was found to be only weakly associated with leadership. So we can see that, psychology and the personality model does kind of overlay some of the traits that we're looking at, or some of the things that we can associate with an individual or individuals that are in a position of leadership. Well, how does that trait approach work? The trait approach is very different than other approaches that we will delve into in this series, because the trait approach focuses exclusively on the leader, not the followers or the situation. The trait approach does not lay out a set of hypotheses or principles about what kind of leader is needed in a certain situation, or what a leader should do given a particular set of circumstances. Instead, this approach emphasizes that having a leader with certain set of traits is crucial to having effective leadership. If he or she, the leader, and the leader traits, by them being involved here, it becomes the central part of the leadership process. So the leader and the leader traits are the central part of the leadership process when we begin to look at leadership through the lens of the trait theory or the trait approach. The trait approach suggests that organizations will work better if the people in managerial positions have designated leadership profiles. To find the right people to help them increase organizational effectiveness, a trait assessment is used to determine whether an individual fits their needs. The trait approach is also used of personal awareness and development. By analyzing their own traits, managers can gain an idea of their strengths and weaknesses and get a feel as to how others in the organization see them. The trait assessment can help managers determine whether they have the quality to move up or should they relocate to another aspect in the organization. And so upper management kind of looks at these things, and people, and they're given these tests. And maybe you didn't realize that some of these tests are based upon some sort of leadership theory. And if that particular company or organization is using the trait model, then they can determine whether or not you fit well in that role or whether you should be somewhere else in the company. Well, there are strengths and criticisms regarding the trait approach. And I'm going to talk about both of those here briefly. From a strength perspective, there are several identifiable strengths. Number one, people have the need to see their leaders as gifted people who are out in front leading the way. So it identifies that the person that's in charge and the person that's over them is gifted and is adequately equipped for that position. The second strength is there's over 100 years of research based upon the trait theory, which provides a tremendous amount of credibility to viewing leadership through this lens. Thirdly, the trait approach provides some benchmarks in what we should be looking for in a leader. So these are some identifiable strengths that are associated with the trait approach. On the other hand, the trait approach has several weaknesses, and I want to talk about two of them. First, the failure of the trait approach is to delimit a definitive list of traits. Although an enormous number of studies have been conducted over the past 100 years, the findings have been ambiguous and uncertain at times. Furthermore, the list of traits appeared to be endless. So that's one of the failures, is that it does not have a definitive list, but it just seems to keep growing. Another apparent weakness is that the trait approach fails to take situations into account. Now, this is important. The truth is that people who possess certain traits that make them leaders in one situation may not be leaders at all in another. In other words, the situation influences the leadership. This reality makes it difficult to identify a universal set of leadership traits in isolation from the context in which the leadership occurs. My last point today that I want to talk about, and that is the application of such theory and how it has been used. And the point is, number one, despite its shortcomings, the trait approach provides valuable information about leadership. It can be applied by individuals at all levels and in all types of organizations. Although the trait approach does not provide a definitive set of traits, it does provide direction regarding which traits are good, or rather, which traits are good to have if one aspires to a leadership position. By taking trait assessments and other similar questionnaires, People gain insight into whether they have certain traits deemed important for leadership. They can pinpoint their strengths and weaknesses with regard to leadership. And so when we think about that, think about the spiritual gift inventory and ask yourself the question, you that are people of faith, has the trait assessment, has the trait theory informed that particular assessment? Well, we're going to find out. And that's just one of the things we're going to look at. Well, I trust that you've been blessed this week as we kind of delve into a classroom type session about one of the leadership theories called the trait approach. Come back again next week on Talking Points as we look at the skills approach. We want to look at the skills approach and how it's viewed as a practical way of defining leadership. God bless you and have a great week.